of James Bond, but this person has been described as Jane Bond of innovation because of the fact that she's got an incredible amount of $18 billion worth of stuff that she has launched, the products that she's launched. We are going to find out how does somebody do something like that. But not just that, she used a term, a phrase, where she said in her TED talk in 2013 that sitting is the new smoking of this generation. And that talk actually has been done about 400 million times. So if you're getting used to this millions and billions, then I just need to invite my guest onto the show. With that, one of the Thinkers 50, I'm delighted to present Nilofer Merchant. Nilofer, thank you so much for being here on the show. Welcome.
Thank you, Abhijit. I'm so glad to be here.
I want to get started with this fabulous book that you've written, which is really our best work. That almost sounds like the title of something that is the last book that you write. But our best work was lovely. I just like the fact that just for the readers, it talks about the invisible norms that act like a cage in the workplace, in the world of work. What prompted you to write that?
Yeah, so our best work, one of the things I'm just doing with those three words, I'm really trying to figure out how we think about what is ours, what is
Hmm.
best, and what is work. And so our, in our modern economy, often benefits just a very small group of people. And I think our economy deserves more expansiveness. Then best right now is often defined by how much money we make, not whether or not we're solving meaningful problems. And then work is often defined as the contract and the job, not the calling and the opportunity to use the fullest of yourselves, in the way in which we can create value. And that changes our joy, that changes our innovation, and of course it changes our economic profile, because right now we're doing so the smallest things possible and limiting what we can actually create. And so this book is certainly a vision for what more is possible. And then you asked what drove me to write the work. I'm holding a space of imagination that better, even the best, is possible. And I think it's really written for my 22-year-old son who looks at work today and says, why would I do that? Why would I join this universe that sucks so much? And I'm like, well, we need to fix it. We need to fix it for him and for all of us.
Yeah, your book is dedicated to kiddo. I understand. Yes, I love the way that you've, in some sense, brought in yourself into the story, as well as your observations about the work that you've done, through your company, Intangible Labs. Uh, what do you do with Intangible Labs? Tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, so Intangible Labs, the idea is right now we can only measure a very small portion of value creation. So we can measure the things that we can sort of like nail down, right? The buildings, the people, the patent cost, et cetera, inventory. And that really, of course, doesn't reflect how we create value. And so for only measuring that piece, we've got something like 16%. And because we mostly manage to what we can measure, then we're running around managing humans as costs instead of humans as source of ideas. So in order for us to shift and actually be able to value humans as source of ideas, and whether or not they're actually having a meeting of the minds, and whether or not they're actually solving meaningful problems, we need a different set of metrics. And so the book is actually formed around that, the 24 elements. I was basically trying to name, okay, if we were going to measure the intangibles, what would we want to measure? We'd want to measure our rate of curiosity. We'd want to measure whether or not we're able to have tough conversations. We're going to measure whether or not we handle disagreements well, right? So Intangible Labs is getting to that. And the idea is that HR people, especially talent people, especially now have a different seat at the table, because right now what that happens is they show up with their culture deck and the CFO shows up with the numbers, and those two cannot win against each other, right? One always wins the numbers. And so I'm trying to figure out how to give the talent community their own set of numbers that they can show up with and say, hey, listen, our innovation engine is running at 52%. And here's what we need to do about it, because that's what the other thing Intangible Labs does, is it predicts then the next right thing to do so you can actually change those numbers and grow them.
You talk about 24 invisible norms. And, for the benefit of our listeners, let me just say, what I found fascinating is most of the times, people kind of say that, here is a norm and you sort of figure out how to deal with it. What I liked about, the way you've described these norms in your book, Our Best Work, and I absolutely recommend that you read this book. What I found Nilofer doing is she talks about the interconnectedness of these 24 norms, and together it forms like a cage. So it's not any one by itself, but what the collective does to us, and which is what it is so fascinating. So I'm going to sort of say that if you had to pick one, which is probably the most common and which affects so many of us in the way that we experience the world of work, what would that be?
Mm. It's like saying which of your children do you love the best? That's a tough one. One of the reasons I wrote the
If you
20.
have 24 children, then it's easy to pick one.
Exactly. But so one of the reasons I was doing this interweaving of these ideas was I think in the management world, we get rewarded for writing about one singular thing and sort of trying to simplify it. And so most people, in fact, can read a business book by reading the intro, skimming most of the book, reading the closure, and they get the idea, right? Because the whole thing is we're basically giving you multiple patterns of the same thing. And what I want to do is say, listen, the reason work isn't working for most of us is not because of one thing. It's the complexity. And so it's a bold book, right? To write because I'm asking the reader to hold that frame. And it's not a but, it's an and. So like if you're a Bayer and trying to figure out how to reinvent the company, you can't look at a single idea. You actually need to think in complexity. And so what I'm hoping is this book ends up giving those organizations that know that things are not working, I'm just about ready to use a profanity word there. They now have a way to do a team-based approach to how do we actually fix it. And not like utopia, but like, oh, we can start here and here and here.
When you look at these 24 pieces which come together, I also relate to the fact that most of the times the world that we are in, it's so complex that a single function, whether it's finance or marketing or HR or anything, by itself, that may give only a partial solution. What you need is a multifunctional view, actually a multidisciplinary view, because I think that's where leadership is going to go. Would you think I'm on the right track when I say
Oh my
that?
gosh, so much so. In fact, somebody announced a conference thesis to me and shared, they were thinking about calling it something like people and technology and purpose or something. And I was like, okay, first of all, that is such a 1996 thesis. And I said, we're in a polycrisis. So it is not single track of people or technology or purpose. It is this interwoven way in which all the disciplines need to come together. And if you think about how when we solve our toughest problems at work, it's the same. So we need to have this interdisciplinary, cross-functional way in which we can access multiple points of view and then bring those together and challenge the frames by which each of us is holding those multiple points of view, because the frames are always going to be like horses in your background, the blinders that we live by. And then we also need to figure out how to align ourselves not with each other in our disciplines, that identity that sometimes says, I'm a finance person, so I'm supposed to be here representing finance, but to go, what is our shared problem? And in the book, I introduced this idea that Mary Parker Follett first introduced 100 years ago called the law of the situation. And Mary Parker Follett was actually our first management consultant, which is hilarious. About 100 years ago in the 1920s, she was studying organizations and using her social worker kind of perspective and saying, listen, the situation will change how we all come to the problem. And so instead of thinking, what is Abhijit thinking and Nilofer thinking, and is she the leader, is he the leader? It's to go, what does the situation require of us? And then how do we turn towards that and go, oh, in this situation, we might need someone, who's got operational experience, or in this case, we need someone who's a discipline expert, or in this case, we need someone who's a really strong people leader, right? And therefore, our roles and our identities in relationship to each other changes because we go, hey, in this case, I am the best person to come and lead, not because I have a title, but because I have this perspective that is so needed at the table today.
Your answer actually triggered my next two questions, but I'll ask them in sequence. One is, the work that you've done in the past, which is about how um, ideas travel through networks. They don't travel alone. And when you bring a multidisciplinary team and you bring multiple disciplines, multiple functions, those teams have become harder to manage because a finance person may be comfortable managing somebody from finance because they speak the same language, but how do you manage somebody from talent management or marketing or from supply chain, from some other discipline? Because every discipline has its own language which is
Jargon,
specific.
yes. Yeah.
How do you make those teams work?
I think one of the things it's really changing in the last 30 years, we're going to see it go forward, is we've mostly been hiring for information expertise. So that the person who has the most information about that field ends up becoming the boss. And if you think about the role of AI, and even before that, Google search, it changed our access to information. And so now I don't think leadership or management is about knowing the most, about like something. It's about figuring out, okay, what is the construct I need to create, the context I need to create for all the expertise to come into the room. So yes, I need to know enough to be able to call bullshit on things. And I need to be able to sit there and go, what makes you think that? How do we connect it to this? Those questions are strategic questions that actually cause alignment and not information matching. And so that's the shift we're going to see in leadership. We're going to see people who are actually focused on generative questions that create alignment between people, that focus the direction of a team in the right place. And you got to do those three things really well. And you got to not have to care about whether or not you know the answer, because that in some ways actually says, by the way, we're going to look to the past to inform the future.
Which is the challenge of data driven decisions, because data can be collected only in the past. We do not have an ability to collect data on multiple factors that are impacting organizations. So, human judgment is going to become precious. Human judgment, the kind of relationships we bring to work, and of course, the narrative we tell ourselves
Yeah,
that
you
who we
really,
are.
yeah, you're probably going exactly where I think you're going, which is this concept of loneliness. Is that where you were just about to head? Should I explore that with
Of
you?
course. Why do you think I'm saying that? It's just so, because this is, to me, that is the identity shift that we are going to experience in the world of work. AI is going to shift all of that. Tell me about
So I,
onlyness.
I first coined the term loneliness in 2013, and it was trying to. So again, I'm a business person and an economics person. I'm not a talent person. So just so you see my perspective.
We,
And what
we
I
have something in common. I'm an economics person and a business person and a talent person. We are all ands.
it's an all and yeah. So
It's an and world.
what I was trying to get to is value creation had changed from being able to manage things, and so the production of things, to the manifestation of ideas into reality. And when I was noticing that shift just in the broad sort of macro, I was going, well, then the unit of value creation isn't the factory line. The unit of factory, it changes to the ideas that are coming out of people's heads that, when then joined together, allows us to solve meaningful problems. And I was like, okay, so if it's original ideas, originality is rooted in a person on that perspective. And so I called it loneliness. What is that spot in the world only one stands in, which is a function of your history and experience as well as your visions and hopes. And I coined another word, not for the sake of marketing, but because originality suggests that we can spot it. And right now, we only see something like 30% of the ideas that actually are in existence. And that's because we only listen to the people whose ideas are already credentialed, who already have power and status. And so I had to find a way to say, listen, that's not enough. For us to access the full capacity of this economy, we have to go down to another level of onlyness and have each of us recognize that we have a perspective and a point of view that needs to be brought to the table. And it will look like this. It could be me saying, I see an underbanked community because I grew up poor and I know what it is to go to a cash and carry place that cashes a check at 7%. So I know that there's a usury cost to people who are underbanked. And if I can actually celebrate that point of view, then I can say to the bank that I work at, hey, listen, there's a market opportunity that most of us don't see because most of the people in the room are rich, right? And it will also look like that idea coming forward and somebody else saying, yeah, and if we connect it to technology in this way, we can actually really lower the cost of that distribution. And so now you can see originality and points of view coming together, joined together in a way that allows us to solve meaningful problems. But it starts with each of us actually acknowledging and celebrating that identity that might not be valued by the outside world. So poverty typically doesn't get you a seat at the table. And I'm saying, what if poverty is actually a source of your ideas? And specific to your experience, what is it you see that no one else sees that if you can acknowledge might actually help the industry? That's only,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And this is so true because I know that you've scaled so many products and that have earned about 18 billion, which is a phenomenal number. And I suspect you would have used some of this concept of onlyness. How do you bring that to the table? I know you've written about this whole example of cash and carry coming from the lens that if somebody who's not privileged actually begins to see a different strata of the world. So, as they say, an ant's point of view is different from the eagle's point of view when you look at that.
And CK Prala talked about it in a different angle.
Bottom
Uh,
of the pyramid.
it's such a beautiful body of work, right? The bottom of the pyramid answer, but he's really trying to get to how do we get to this multiplicity and of perspectives, and then how do we actually stop just focusing on the group we're used to focusing on, which is the group in power. And I think that expansiveness is the opportunity for all of us to hold, wow, each of us has a perspective worth having. And by the way, I have a lot of people say to me, I really don't know if I have a perspective that's really that distinct. And if I just spend 5, 10, 20 minutes with them, I can hear things like this. So it's usually the person taking for granted the perspective they have and going, well, if I have it, other people must have it, or it must not be that important if other people don't already say it. And it was my stepdaughter, when she was going to grad school, she had applied for these physics programs. She had done really well in physics at UC Berkeley. And so she applied and got asked to apply at like University of Chicago and MIT and so on. And she said to me when she was looking at the process of choosing, she goes, well, if I can do it, anyone can. And I was like, honey, I'm pretty sure no, that's not true. And she was dismissing herself from the table because she was taking for granted her gift. And even in that case, it was a really successful gift, right? So you think, oh, maybe you could honor it. But even those of us who are getting accolades for something can sometimes dismiss it and go, oh, because it's easy for me, maybe it's not that valuable. And so I just want us to get comfortable with whatever that is, that it can be a shadow, like in terms of poverty. It can be a light, which is like getting a PhD in physics, and it comes easily to her. It's figuring out what spot in the world do I stand, because then it allows 8 million people to show up with agency into the economic world.
And there's such a massive opportunity. Think about the fact that Prahlad's work talked about the fact that when you suddenly change the lens and stop building a product for those that small sliver of people who can afford that product, and you change it down, that bottom of the pyramid is massive. If you sort of really look at, there are 2,000 billionaires in this world, but there are 8 billion people. Where do you think, even if you earn 10 cents for each one of them, you would earn way more than selling anything to 2,000 people? So that's the broad concept that he talked about.
It is. And I, in fact, CK actually read my book right before he passed, and his family was able to share with me that the new how, he really loved it, because what I was talking about is how do we do collaboration at work and come together and actually honor all the different perspectives that are at the table. And my background in strategy work was that I was being asked to come into situations where companies were deeply struggling. They had typically tried it themselves and failed, and then hired one of the big firms, strategy firms, and then failed. And then they were like, well, can you come in and help? Because we've heard you're good at this kind of thing. And I would always say, hey, listen, so before we start, I need you to send an email to anyone in the company and invite them to come play. And here's the scope of what we're being asked to do. And I'd ask the CEO to do an invitation to play. And I swear to God, every CEO wanted to fire me when I asked them to do this because they were like, well, you're not taking me seriously enough. Like, this is a dire situation, right? We're on the ropes. We need it fixed. And I go, yeah, the thing I'm assuming here that you're not is that the answer that you've been trying to solve the problem, and it's not because you're stupid that you're not solving the problem. So that means you're missing something. And if you're missing something, you actually have to leave open that aperture of what perspective are you not seeing in order for you to actually have the full scope of the problem. So I'm actually honoring the intelligence of the group and saying, you're not stupid. That's not why you're failing. And it's not because you're not working hard enough. There's something you need to see that you're not yet seeing. And undoubtedly, every single time this happened, we know it would be like 2-3 weeks in and we'd be having one of those big meetings that's messy and stuff. And I'd be holding the space for, we're going to figure shit out. And somebody would go, what I'm touching is hairy. And another person would say, well, actually, no, that's not true. What I'm touching is smooth. And they would do like the equivalent of things. And I'd say, well, what if it's all true? Right. And we'd get the equivalent of an elephant in a room and realize that every person was touching a different part of the whole. And we need to see the full picture and not have a debate about right and wrong, but to go, and, and, and as we add those things up, we go, oh my gosh. And there'd be like this little lightning moment, around the room where everybody goes, oh, and there's an intelligence that's created when we're together that is so powerful. And we often think about smart as being, like one person with the light bulb over their head, but intelligence is always a shared asset.
You actually had a chance, in your book, you talk about presenting an idea to Steve Jobs. And, I would love to have you tell that story. I could tell it, but nobody would say it as well as you would because you were right there.
Oh my.
Eh, what was it like to present an idea of innovation? The reason why it stood out for me is because when we think of just do a word association, Steve Jobs, innovation. You would sort of really think about that as almost novel. And yet, let me
Yeah.
not spoil the story.
So
Tell the
he
story.
came back for, he had been the Exodus and then he's returning. And
And
our
you joined when he was back at Apple. Is that when?
I joined in 89 and then he returned in 96 and I left in 96. So this basically is the crossover moment. And I'm young. I'm probably like in my mid 20s, maybe 26 or something. And I had been leading a team. So basically, I got handed this problem by the business unit leader and said, there's just one product that's actually profitable, but not growing. We don't understand why. Could you take it on? And I knew nothing about anything. So, just whatever. And I was like, so I called a bunch of people and asked a bunch of questions and got people motivated and organized. And we figured out what we could solve. And so then Steve returns. And because I had been the one to basically say, we could do this kind of thing, my whole team decided I would be the one to present the tech, which is, pretty unusual for someone that young and, so on. But I was like, okay, I'll do it. And I, so I got in the little navy suit from Ann Taylor and those shoulder pads. And I'm standing up there waiting to present to Jobs, just practiced and everything. And Jobs comes in this is before his black turtleneck days. So he's wearing these old flip flops that needed to be thrown away. They were so skanky, and jeans and like a logo t-shirt. And he's like totally unkempt, And before I even open my mouth or anything, before he acknowledges anyone else in the room, he sees the slides that are behind me, which, big 20-foot slides, old school days of PowerPoint. And he says, and it says the word channel somewhere on the slide. And he says, fuck the channel. We don't need the fucking channel. And I remember going, well, is the presentation over? Because I'm like, what do I do at this moment? So I looked over at my crew because my whole, management team, all of whom were more senior than me, were standing against the wall with their, khaki pants and blue shirts and stuff. And they were all like looking identical to me. But I looked over at my boss and I'm like, what's up? And he's like, and I was like, okay. So I went ahead and did the presentation because I was like, well, I at least should pitch the case. And so basically we were the only profitable division. We were really growing. We had just won a big award. And we basically had a revenue stream that could support the company and while it resurrected. So that was basically the argument of like, you don't need to keep us forever, but we're really delivering. And so it can be your safety net, while you're doing the rest of the business regrowth thing. So we had heard he didn't want to keep the server line. He wanted to bring the next server line in. And so he didn't ask even one question during the conversation. And so one of the things that I have processed on in that experience as I kind of went back in my career and kind of went, what the hell was that moment in the room? I was realizing, like, first of all, he basically said what the answer was before he even heard a word, which is how power gets to operate. And then he didn't ask any questions at all while I was talking because his decision was already made. And what was so hard about that is we often say, oh gosh, the best idea should win in this business, right? That's what innovation actually should be. But what often happens is what Jobs was doing, which is asserting control and asserting an answer before listening to any input. And that's really the lesson and opportunity here is we often think about change as, I'll come in and I'll decide and I'll tell you. And that's actually just another word for control. And I'm like, well, for real change to happen, I have to have choice in it. I have to participate in it. So I did, not unexpectedly, I had been recruited by a bunch of, because people knew there was a lot of turmoil. So everyone was getting emails to say, hey, would you want to join us, kind of thing. And so I went back to my desk and wrote, well, yes, I would like to interview for this VP of this job. And I left shortly thereafter to a little startup company called Go Live that actually got bought by Adobe. And, the career went on to other places since then. But I love that experience because, Jobs is so honored. And I'm not saying he doesn't deserve to be, but he puts himself as a heroic icon and people forget the story. He actually turned down the iPhone profile. The thing that basically allowed the company to enter this modern era, he said no, it was a crappy idea. And his team worked independently without him and hid the project from him until it became more viable. So this is a person who, I'm not sure he deserves the moniker that we give him because a true innovator would allow the multiplicity of ideas to show up.
And I sometimes wonder whether it is um, just the ego that how can a good idea come from that young kid?
That's right. That's right.
It's
Exactly.
that's really what happens. And I've seen that, well, in a completely different context, I've seen a similar kind of a power structure emerging when, I was watching a legendary Guru Shishya combination, and the Guru sang something, and the Shishya did something which was different, but everybody applauded because, we were listening and we thought, wow, and that was what it is. And the Guru says, don't do it again. It just completely killed the enthusiasm of the singer, and he just sat in the corner and just repeated what the guru was doing and just supported and took on a very supporting role instead of adding to the experience of the listener.
And this
Uh,
is what's limiting our economy and it's limiting our teamwork and it's limiting our joy, right? And so it's this cascading thing of if I can't contribute that creativity, then my own sort of manifestation of who I am in the world is made smaller. And then that affects our teamwork and it affects what we create, right? So this is the problem. And the opportunity is like, how can we even just go for a minute, go pause ourselves as leaders? Maybe that's the takeaway from this call, right? Is to go, tell me more, like just teach ourselves to go, if I'm hearing something that's deeply uncomfortable, instead of shutting it down, go tell me more. And so I can let myself pause and just even hear it.
you know, in my last LinkedIn newsletter, I wrote about the fact that when we think about going to office for work, so many people think that that's a great idea. And yet we are also saying you do all the work at home, because, work from home allows you to do that. And I've always thought that office should be a place where you go there only to socialize and bounce ideas off. And here is something, and look at what you wouldn't do during the course of work. So spend the time bouncing crazy ideas. That why would this not succeed? Imagine if we launch a product which is not this but this. Uh, those kind of ideas. How about creating space for those. And the office then becomes something people look forward to because it's really like going to a party every day and you go there to
Exactly.
work. Yeah, and you're
Yeah.
doing the work at home. It's the flip model of classroom being applied to the office.
I love it. I love it. No, wouldn't that be fun? I mean, I think if I could fix one thing about work, I'd fix meetings because most people spend meetings in the most idiotic ways. And I think all of us can kind of relate, right? We're just repeating what we said and like people don't read. And so we have to spend our time updating. I'm like, oh my God. So if I can make every meeting like a party and we use it as a way to collaborate, that would be my best use of meetings. Absolutely. I'm with you.
All right, we need to start a company together on that. And on that particular note, Nilofer, thank you so much. I just really once again want to recommend that she's written this fabulous book. You have that. Oh, I was hoping that you. This is it. This is the book. I love the cover, by the way. Whoever's designed your cover, really.
Thank you. I'll pass that on to the Harper team. They really worked hard for me for getting something so simple and yet so powerful.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I just think it's a great design. And Harper was also the people who published my first book. So there's a sentimental view of that. But thank you so very much. It's such a lovely book. The 24 Invisible Norms, something that you should read. Even if you pick it up and just apply one or two of them, guaranteed you'll go to the other 22 because then you will know that it's this combination which makes it so hard for people to break out of. Thank you once again for being here. Appreciate your doing this for us. Thank you.
Thanks for this conversation, Abhijit.